My adopted daughter texted, "You don't have to come for my wedding. I met my dad and he is better than you." But I was heartbroken and shocked because I sponsored the entire wedding budget as I would for my own daughter. I didn't react, just calmly replied with "okay" and moved on. 2 days to the event, what happened shocked everyone. I will tell you everything. First, if you enjoy these kinds of stories, support us by subscribing to this channel. Click on the like button and tell us where you are watching us from in the comments section. Now let me tell you how everything unfolded. They say love makes you blind, but I think when it comes to your children, it's not blindness, it's deliberate denial. I saw the shift in her eyes months before the text came. Layla, my daughter, the one I raised from the time she was a scrawny 9-year-old with a haunted look and a worn duffel bag, had started pulling away in a way that was different. Not the usual growing pains or distance adulthood brings, but a coolness that made my chest tighten every time she smiled and didn't meet my eyes. Still, I pushed it aside. I figured she was stressed with wedding planning. I thought maybe she was tired, overworked, just trying to juggle life. Because the alternative, that she was emotionally replacing me, was a truth I wasn't ready to sit with. Layla came into my life like a storm I wasn't prepared for. Her mother had been a patient at the hospital where I worked maintenance, and by sheer circumstance and a last-minute cancellation by the system, she ended up in my home as a temporary foster situation. Temporary turned into forever when her biological father stopped showing up to court hearings and her mother signed away custody from a rehab facility. I was in my late 30s then, single, settled, no plans for a family. But she looked at me one night and asked, "Can I call you Dad?" I remember the way the word echoed in that small kitchen like it didn't belong there, like it was too big for the room. I choked up so hard I could only nod. That moment lived rent-free in my heart ever since. And so I did what dads do. I gave her everything I had. From dance classes to dentist appointments, scraped knees to science fairs, I never missed a beat. I was the one braiding her hair for picture day, the one driving her to sleepovers, standing awkwardly at the door with snacks in hand. I taught her how to ride a bike, how to parallel park, how to balance a checkbook. I remember one night in high school when her heart got broken and she came into the living room sobbing, collapsing into my chest. "No one's ever gonna love me the way you do," she cried. And I believed it. Hell, I still believe it. So when she got engaged and came to me with wide eyes and a stack of Pinterest boards, I didn't hesitate. "Whatever you need," I told her. "I got you." And I meant it. I didn't just mean financially, although I covered it all. The venue, an elegant converted barn outside the city, cost me over 12 grand. I paid in full. The catering? Another 10, because she wanted filet mignon and vegetarian options. Dress, flowers, photographer, makeup team. I handed over my card so many times it practically lived in her wedding planner's purse. I wasn't just footing the bill. I was invested. I was proud. This was my baby girl getting married, and I wanted it to be perfect. I kept envisioning that walk down the aisle, arm in arm, handing her over with the same love I'd given her since the day she walked into my life. I didn't expect a trophy or applause. I just wanted to be there. I just wanted to matter. So when her text came, it split me in two. "You don't have to come for my wedding. I met my dad and he is better than you." But that was it. No context, no warning, no explanation. Just a straight shot to the chest at 7:42 p.m. on a Wednesday night. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone still in my hand, trying to figure out if I'd read it wrong. I reread it. Again and again. My stomach turned so hard I thought I might throw up. Better than you. Better. The word burned. I hadn't even known she was looking for him. She hadn't mentioned a thing. And now, days before her wedding, the one I was paying for, she was cutting me out like a bad habit. I must have stared at the message for 5 minutes before I typed the only word I could manage through the buzzing in my ears. Okay, that was it. I didn't ask questions, didn't beg, didn't tell her how deep it cut. I just set the phone down, walked to the sink, and rinsed out my coffee mug from earlier like nothing happened. Because when you've raised someone from the ground up, fed them, clothed them, sheltered them, celebrated them, it doesn't register immediately that they can choose someone else. It doesn't compute that love isn't always repaid with love. Some debts are never settled. And in that moment, standing in my quiet kitchen, I realized she wasn't my little girl anymore. She was someone else's now. Or maybe she always had been. I barely slept that night. I just kept going over every memory, every moment, trying to find the one where I messed it all up. Was I too strict in high school? Did I say something wrong when she told me about the engagement? Was it because I didn't cry enough at her graduation? I picked through 2 decades of memories like debris after a storm, searching for the one crack that made the whole thing fall apart. And still, I found nothing. I had loved her completely. I had made mistakes, sure, but never the kind that warranted erasure. And now she wanted to pretend like I was never there. The worst part? I still wanted to go. Even after that text, some pitiful part of me wanted to show up and sit in the back, just to see her in the dress. To see her smile. But that was the part of me that didn't love myself enough yet. That was the part that still believed being a father meant being a doormat. And that version of me, he was done. When Layla first got engaged, I'll admit, something inside me swelled with pride. It wasn't just the idea of her getting married. It was the fact that I had seen her through everything. Every scraped knee, every late-night breakdown, every birthday candle. Watching her find someone who made her eyes light up, that felt like the reward at the end of a long road. I remember when she first brought him home. Marcus. He was polite, shook my hand firmly, complimented the brisket I made without sounding forced. He even helped me carry the dishes to the sink, which immediately earned him a few extra points in my book. She laughed louder when he was around. She looked lighter. That's all I'd ever wanted for her. Someone who would take care of her when I couldn't anymore. Someone who could carry the baton when I was gone. I didn't hesitate to offer help. I didn't even wait to be asked. I told her, "You plan the wedding of your dreams. I'll take care of the rest." What I didn't realize at the time, what I should have realized, was that weddings, more than any other event, reveal everything. They expose tensions that were hidden under rugs for years. They make loyalties clear. They bring out the best in some and the worst in others. As the planning began, there were little moments that now stand out like glowing red flags in hindsight. She started calling less, texting in shorter sentences. She'd cancel lunch plans last minute with vague excuses. I chalked it up to wedding stress. Everyone gets a little frazzled juggling caterers and seating charts. But I remember one night, I asked if she wanted to go over some options for music, and she said, "Oh, Marcus and his dad already picked the band. You don't need to worry about that." I laughed it off then, but something about the way she said, "You don't need to worry," felt like being politely shoved out of the frame. Still, I kept writing checks. I paid the $5,000 deposit for the venue, an old vineyard with ivy-covered brick and soft golden lighting that Layla had fallen in love with the moment she stepped on the property. I sat across from the owner, smiled, and signed the paperwork while she bounced with excitement in the background. The catering bill came next, $10 for 100. She wanted elegant dishes, passed hors d'oeuvres, and a plated dinner service. I remember her saying, "It's only once in a lifetime, Dad." And I nodded because that's what you do when you love someone more than your bank account. After that came the florist, $3,800. The photographer, another $3,500. Makeup, $1,200. I never hesitated. Not once. She was my daughter. This was her day. Of course I'd give her the best. Now, I realized I was financing a fantasy that didn't include me. I started hearing things secondhand. Marcus' mom mentioned to me at a brunch that Layla had found her real dad on Facebook. She said it like it was nothing, like Layla hadn't just detonated a bomb in my chest. I smiled through clenched teeth and said, "Oh?" I hadn't heard. And she gave me that sympathetic look people give when they're not sure if you're aware you've been replaced. I brought it up to Layla later that week, trying to keep my voice light, casual. "Heard you've been in touch with your father." She shrugged, looked down at her phone, and mumbled, "Yeah, it's not a big deal." But it was. And I knew it. She had found the man who abandoned her and was now inching me out like expired furniture. I didn't push. I should have. Maybe if I had confronted it then, things would have turned out different. But I was scared. Scared that if I made her choose, she wouldn't choose me. Even after the text, those cold, final words, I didn't act out of anger. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. Crystal clear understanding that if I wasn't welcome in her life, then neither was my money. 2 days before the wedding, I sat down with every receipt, every contract, every vendor name. I made the calls, one by one. I told the florist to cancel the delivery, told the photographer not to show, called the caterers, and pulled the plug on the order. They were all under my name, my card, my signature. I canceled the event hall lease and asked them to lock the gate. I even pulled the DJ last minute. He apologized, said it was unusual, but I told him it was a family matter. He didn't ask more questions. When I made those calls, I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was calm. Too calm, maybe. There was no rage left. Just a hollow quiet that settled in like dust on old furniture. I didn't do it to hurt her. I did it because I finally realized I was hurting myself more by staying silent. If I wasn't her father, as she so clearly said, then she could handle the wedding without me. Her real dad, as she called him, could step in and save the day. Let him write the checks. Let him stand by her side. I'd already done my time. I didn't tell anyone I was canceling the payments. Not her, not Marcus, not the vendors. I just vanished from the narrative, the same way she had erased me from the guest list. I didn't post anything, didn't make a scene. I simply stepped out of the story and watched as the chapter closed without me. It's funny how silence can be louder than shouting. The night before the wedding, I sat on my porch with a glass of whiskey and the hum of cicadas filling the air. I thought about texting her. One last message. Not to beg or fight, just to say goodbye. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. There was nothing left to say. She had already told me everything I needed to hear in 9 words. I met my dad, and he is better than you. Sometimes a single sentence is enough to end an entire book. The morning of the wedding dawned like any other Saturday. Quiet, overcast, with a slight breeze curling through the trees outside my window. I woke up around 6:30, the way I always did, and sat on the edge of my bed with my hands hanging between my knees. There was no rush, no tux to iron, no speech to rehearse. The weight in my chest felt heavier than usual, but I wore it like an old coat by then. Something familiar, something I knew how to carry. Part of me had expected guilt to settle in overnight, maybe a flicker of doubt. But there was nothing, just stillness. I didn't feel proud, but I wasn't ashamed either. I had done what needed to be done, not for revenge, but for clarity, for self-respect. And when someone tells you they don't want you in their life, you have to believe them the first time. Around 9 a.m., the first call came through. It was a number I didn't recognize, so I let it ring. A minute later, another call. This one from Marcus. I stared at his name flashing on the screen like a warning light and let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready. Not yet. I just sipped my coffee, stepped out onto the porch, and listened to the birds chirping like it was any other day. A few more calls followed, numbers I vaguely remembered from the planner's contact sheet. By the time 9:45 hit, my phone was vibrating every other minute. I finally turned the ringer off and placed it face down on the table. Whatever storm was brewing, they could weather it without me. I had done my part. I had made my decision. And I wasn't going to be guilt back into place. What I didn't know, what I'd only learn later, was that chaos had already erupted at the vineyard. Guests began arriving only to find the parking lot empty and the gates still chained shut. The owner, honoring my request and cancellation, hadn't unlocked anything. No tables had been set up, no chairs arranged, no music playing. Just a quiet, locked venue with a confused wedding party gathering at the front entrance like uninvited guests at their own event. Layla was still at the hotel getting her makeup done when the calls started pouring in. Her bridesmaids were frantically trying to reach the planner, the vendors, anyone. But no one was answering, because they weren't coming. There was no wedding staff, no florist, no caterer, nothing. All of it had been quietly pulled out from under her like a rug, and now they were standing in the mess, wondering what happened. At 10:12 a.m., Layla called me. I saw her name on the screen and just stared at it. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired. So damn tired. But I answered. Hello. I said, my voice calm, steady. Are you kidding me right now? She hissed, her voice sharp and shrill like a live wire. The venue is locked. The vendors aren't answering. What the hell did you do? I took a deep breath, leaned back in my chair, and let the silence stretch for a moment before I replied. You said you didn't want me at your wedding, Layla. That doesn't mean you cancel everything, she snapped. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? People are showing up, and there's nothing here. No food, No flowers, no music, nothing. I let out a quiet laugh. Not mocking, not cruel, just exhausted. Yeah, that's kind of the point. She went silent for a moment, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. You're punishing me. You're ruining my wedding because you're bitter I wanted to meet my real dad. I'm not punishing you, I said, keeping my voice low. I'm just removing myself from a situation where I'm clearly not wanted. You made your choice, Layla. I respected it. But if I'm not your father, then I have no business funding your wedding. That's for your real dad to handle, isn't it? You're being petty, she whispered, her voice trembling now, not from anger, but from humiliation. Everyone's here. Everyone's asking questions. You've embarrassed me. No, I said, my tone sharpening just slightly. You embarrassed yourself when you texted me 3 days before the wedding to say I was being replaced. You made this decision. I just followed through. She started to cry then. Real tears. Not crocodile ones. I could hear it in her voice, the kind of gasping, frantic sobs that used to send me running down the hall to her room when she was a teenager. That old instinct kicked in, every cell in my body screaming to fix it, to say something soft, to offer comfort. But I didn't move. I didn't offer. Because this wasn't the same little girl anymore. And I wasn't the same dad. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. You did, I said, not unkindly. But it's done. You don't get to decide I'm not your father and still expect me to act like one. There was another long pause before she hung up. No goodbye, just a click. I sat there for a long time after the call ended. I didn't feel good. I didn't feel like a hero. But I also didn't feel like a fool anymore. For years, I'd bent over backward to be everything she needed. And for years, I believed that love, real love, would be enough to hold us together. But sometimes love isn't loud. Sometimes it's not a grand gesture or a moving speech. Sometimes it's just saying no. It's drawing a line and not crossing it, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. By noon, my phone had gone quiet. The calls stopped. The texts dried up. I imagined them scrambling to throw together a last-minute backup, renting a local hall, ordering pizza, asking guests to chip in. I didn't care. I wasn't going to check. Let them handle it. Let her new dad step in and save the day. I hoped he brought his checkbook and some folding chairs. I spent the rest of the day working on the old car in my garage. Wrenches, grease, country music humming in the background. It was therapeutic in its own way. The kind of work where your hands stay busy and your mind stays quiet. Around 4 o'clock, I took a break, wiped the sweat from my brow, and looked up at the sky. It was clear now, the morning clouds having drifted off somewhere else. I felt the sun on my face, and for the first time in weeks, I breathed without that weight pressing on my ribs. Sometimes the hardest thing in the world is letting go of someone you raised. But the truth is, love can't survive where it isn't respected. And I loved her too much to keep allowing myself to be treated like I was nothing. I wasn't angry anymore. Just done. By the next morning, my voicemail inbox was full. 27 messages, most of them from numbers I didn't recognize, and a few from people I hadn't heard from in years. Some were short, confused voices asking why the wedding had been shut down. A few were angry. One woman, who I vaguely remembered as Marcus' aunt, called me a selfish old man and accused me of humiliating Layla on what should have been the happiest day of her life. She didn't mention the text Layla had sent me. She didn't know, or didn't care, that the bride had disinvited me days before the ceremony and declared another man her father. None of these people had the full story. They never do. They just see the fallout and assume the loudest one is the victim. I listened to each message only once. I didn't call anyone back. I wasn't interested in defending myself to people who hadn't stood beside me while I raised that girl from the ground up. Where were they when Layla had night terrors for months after being removed from her birth mother's home? When she failed math in 8th grade and cried on the couch for 2 hours straight? When I sat through 4 hours of Frozen on Ice just to see her eyes light up during Let It Go? None of these people had been around when it mattered. Now they wanted to pass judgment based on a ruined wedding and a few tears. Let them. They weren't my concern anymore. Around noon, I got one message that I actually listened to twice. It was from Marcus. His voice was quiet, low, like he was calling from a car or a side room. "Hey, Mr. Daniels," he began, hesitating like he wasn't sure if he should even be calling me. Hi. I know things got out of hand. Layla's upset. Everyone's upset. But I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't know she sent that message. I didn't know she told you not to come. That wasn't okay. He paused then, and I could hear the weight in his breath. I don't blame you. I wish you had come. I wish things had been different. I just, I don't know. I guess I just wanted to say thank you for everything you did. You didn't deserve this. For a moment, I considered calling him back. He sounded sincere, heartbroken even. Maybe he hadn't been part of the manipulation. Maybe he really hadn't known what Layla had said to me in that text. But then I thought about everything he must have heard in the weeks leading up to that day. The whispered conversations, the changing guest list, the way Layla stopped referring to me as her dad in public, and I realized he had chosen to stay quiet. That was enough for me. Silence is a choice, too. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I dug through the closet in the guest room and pulled out the old camcorder I used when Layla was a kid. It still worked, surprisingly. I sat down on the couch and played the tapes one by one. Birthday parties, school plays, that one camping trip where she cried the first night and I had to let her sleep in my tent. I watched US laugh and dance and burn marshmallows over a fire that didn't want to start. I watched a little girl who once looked at me like I was her whole world. And I wept. I wept not because I wanted her back, but because I missed the version of her who knew who I was. I think there's a unique grief reserved for parents who lose children while they're still alive. It's not like death. It's more confusing than that. There's no funeral, no obituary, just this slow unraveling where one day, the calls stop, the hugs get shorter, the texts become rare, and before you know it, you're a stranger to someone you once bathed, fed, loved, and held through every storm. You become a ghost in their story, and worse, they expect you to accept it quietly. Later that night, I opened a drawer in the kitchen and pulled out the birthday card Layla had given me 5 years ago. The one that said, "No one else would have done what you did for me. I love you more than I'll ever know how to say." I read it 3 times before folding it back and placing it in a small box where I kept the few things I couldn't let go of: hospital wristbands, her first report card, the note she wrote when she was 12 that said, "I'm sorry I yelled at you. I was scared. Thank you for being patient." Those were real. That love was real. But so was the text she sent me 3 days ago. "I met my dad, and he is better than you." And that was the line I couldn't uncross. The next morning, a friend of mine, Tom, a mechanic I've known for over a decade, stopped by. He brought donuts and 2 cups of coffee. Didn't ask permission. Just knocked once and let himself in like we used to do before everyone got so polite and distant. He sat down at my table and raised an eyebrow. "So, you really canceled the whole damn wedding?" I nodded. Every bit of it. He whistled, low and impressed. "Damn, that's cold." I shrugged, not out of indifference, but because there was nothing else to say. She told me not to come. I just followed her instructions. He studied me for a long moment, then leaned forward on his elbows. "You know what's worse than being betrayed?" he asked. "Being made to feel guilty for setting a boundary." I didn't reply. I didn't have to. We both knew he was right. "I raised her, Tom," I finally said, my voice cracking just slightly. "I gave her everything I had, and she tossed me out like a receipt." Tom nodded, his expression softening. "That's what makes it worse. If she didn't mean anything to you, this wouldn't hurt. But it does. Because it should." He didn't stay long. Just long enough to remind me that I wasn't alone in the world, even if it felt that way sometimes. After he left, I went out back and sat in the yard, watching the sky turn orange with the setting sun. Somewhere out there, Layla was starting her new life. Maybe the ceremony got salvaged. Maybe it didn't. I didn't check social media. I didn't ask around. For the first time in years, I didn't want to know. The first few days after the wedding were the quietest my phone had been in years. No calls. No messages. Not even one of those passive-aggressive social media tags people like to post when they want to stir the pot without actually starting the fire. Just silence. I didn't know if Layla and Marcus had managed to cobble something together. I didn't ask. I didn't scroll. I went about my life with the deliberate stillness of a man learning how to live without the person he once considered his son. It's a strange thing to unlearn the instinct to care. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would skip the way it used to when she was in high school and missed curfew. And then I'd remember, I wasn't her emergency contact anymore. I wasn't her anything. Midweek, I got a text from Layla. Not a long one. Not some heartfelt apology or even a rational attempt to talk. Just this. I can't believe you would humiliate me like that. You ruined my wedding. I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. I had 1,000 words I could have sent back. I could have reminded her of who I was, what I did, how I showed up for her over and over when no one else did. I could have attached screenshots of receipts, contracts, old photos. I could have lashed out. But what would that prove? What would it change? I'd already learned the hardest truth a parent can face, that sometimes love alone isn't enough to earn someone's loyalty. I put my phone down without replying and went outside to water the lawn. That night, I sat at the kitchen table flipping through the photo album I hadn't touched in years. Real, printed photographs. The kind you can hold in your hand and not just swipe away. There was one of her at 11, missing her front teeth, holding a science fair ribbon like it was an Olympic medal. Another of us in the backyard, her arms around my neck, a popsicle melting down her wrist. I flipped the pages slowly, stopping now and then to trace the edge of a photo, trying to feel something other than the dull ache that had taken up permanent residence in my chest. I didn't regret raising her. Not for a second. But I did regret thinking that love meant always saying yes. That was on me. Later, I pulled out a piece of stationery, good paper, the kind with weight, and wrote a letter I never planned to send. I needed to get it out of my head, off my chest, and into the open air, if only on the page. I wrote, Layla, you weren't an obligation. You were a choice. The best one I ever made. When your mother gave up her rights and your father disappeared, I didn't step in because someone asked me to. I did it because I saw a little girl who needed a place to land. And every day after that, I chose to stay. I chose to be there. When you broke your arm. When you got your first period and didn't want to talk to the school nurse. When you crashed the car and cried for 2 hours on the front step. I chose to be your dad, even when you didn't know what that word meant. Even when you forgot what it meant. But you told me he was better. So now he can have the title. I won't fight for it anymore. I folded it, placed it in an envelope, and slid it into the back of the drawer with the birthday card from 5 years ago. It wasn't for her. It was for me. A goodbye written in ink instead of words spoken through clenched teeth or forced tears. A way to let go with dignity. 2 days later, I ran into a neighbor at the hardware store, a nice woman named Denise who always had something kind to say about my lawn. She glanced at me with that look people give when they've heard things but don't want to come right out and say it. I heard there was some drama at the wedding, she said gently. I nodded. You could say that. She hesitated, then added, You know, some people are saying you overreacted. I met her eyes. Did they tell you what she texted me? No, she admitted. Just that you pulled out the funding last minute. I gave her a small smile, not unkind, just tired. Then they don't know the story, and I'm not in the mood to retell it. She nodded, gave me a soft pat on the arm, and let it go. I appreciated that more than she probably realized. Because the truth is, when people decide you're the villain in their story, there's no explaining your way back into their good graces. The narrative was already written. I had ruined her wedding. I was petty, bitter, maybe even jealous. No one wanted to hear about the years I spent raising her alone. No one wanted to hear about the therapy sessions, the parent-teacher conferences, the nights I held her as she cried herself to sleep. They only wanted to talk about one day, one locked gate, one pulled payment, as if that erased everything else. But that wasn't my fight anymore. I stopped checking for updates. I blocked Layla's number, not out of spite, but for peace. I needed the space to heal, to breathe without constantly bracing for the next accusation. Tom came over again that weekend, this time with burgers and a cooler full of beer. We sat out back, grilling and talking about nothing in particular, sports, the rising gas prices, whether or not the new mechanic at his shop was stealing tools. At one point, he turned to me and asked, Do you think she'll ever come around? I didn't answer right away. I flipped the burgers, let the smoke rise, let the silence stretch. Maybe, I said eventually. But by then, I might not be here waiting. He nodded, took a sip of his beer. Good. That's how it should be. It felt good to say it out loud. Not because I didn't love her anymore. I did. And I probably always would, but because I finally understood that love isn't a leash. It's not a contract that binds you to someone no matter how they treat you. Sometimes love means walking away, not to punish them, but to protect what's left of yourself. As the sun dipped below the fence line and the sky turned soft and purple, I leaned back in my chair and let the moment settle in. I didn't feel victorious, but I felt free, and that was more than enough. The weeks that followed passed slowly, like wading through thick water, every day both too quiet and too loud in all the wrong ways. I thought, naively, that cutting off contact with Layla would bring instant relief, some kind of emotional clarity, like closing a browser with too many tabs open. But that's not how grief works, especially when it comes dressed as someone you loved and raised. It wasn't peace I found first. It was the ache of missing her in all the smallest ways. I'd go to the grocery store and still pick up her favorite cereal without thinking, then stand there staring at it in the cart like it had betrayed me. I'd open my photo gallery to send a picture of the dog and remember, all over again, that she wouldn't be replying. The hardest part wasn't the silence. It was how familiar it became. At first, I kept expecting her to show up. Not physically, but in a message, or a call, or maybe an apology that tiptoed around the edges but was still enough to crack the door open. Something like, "I overreacted. Can we talk?" But no such message ever came. Not in a week. Not in two. Not after a month. The girl I raised had gone quiet, and the woman who replaced her wasn't sending for me. At some point, I stopped checking my phone after work, stopped listening for footsteps that were never coming up the drive. I had to make a choice, to stop mourning someone who wasn't dead and start learning to live with the space she used to fill. I was sitting on the porch one evening, legs stretched out, dogs snoring at my feet, when an envelope arrived in the mail without a return address. No handwriting, just typed. My name, clean and sharp. Inside, there was no letter, just a wedding photo. One single print. Layla in her dress, Marcus beside her, holding hands in what looked like a church basement strung with lights and mismatched chairs. They'd made something work, apparently. The kind of DIY, scrambled-together ceremony that probably looked heartfelt on Instagram, but rang hollow for anyone who knew what had been planned. I stared at it for a while, taking in her smile. She looked happy, or maybe just determined to look happy. Either way, she wasn't looking for my approval. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a statement. Look what I did without you. I set the photo on the kitchen counter and left it there for 3 days before tossing it in a drawer. Not out of spite, but because I couldn't bear to frame a memory that didn't include me. Later that week, I ran into a former coworker of Layla's at the gas station. A sweet woman named Cheryl who used to tell me Layla was the brightest one in their department. She approached me carefully, like someone stepping into a story they only half understand. "I saw pictures from the wedding," she said gently, eyes scanning my face. "I'm sorry you weren't there." I gave a polite smile. Wasn't my invitation to accept. She nodded slowly, lips pursed. She said it was a misunderstanding, that it got blown out of proportion. I didn't say anything for a beat, just let the air hang there. Then I said, "You ever get fired from a job and then asked to keep showing up for free?" Her eyes widened. "No." "Exactly," I said. And then I paid for my gas and drove home. That's the thing people don't get. They think because I raised her, because I said yes for so long, that I owed her something forever. That walking away was an act of cruelty rather than survival. But there comes a point when staying means betraying yourself. And I had betrayed myself long enough. I had handed over every ounce of patience, every dollar of savings, every quiet moment of support without asking for much in return. And the one time I needed my role to be honored, she chose to erase me. I thought about reaching out one last time. Not to fix things, but to say my own goodbye properly. To explain that I wasn't walking away in anger. That I still loved her, in that deep, immovable way that parents do, even when they're forgotten. But I knew how that message would be received. She'd read it through the lens of pride, or worse, she'd see it as another plea for attention. And I had no interest in being pitted or dismissed. No interest in inviting more pain into a wound that had just begun to scab over. Instead, I did something smaller. I took down the framed photo of us from her high school graduation, the one that used to sit by the front door. I wrapped it gently in a towel and placed it in a box with a few other relics, cards, drawings, a copy of the adoption certificate I once kept in a fireproof safe. I sealed the box, labeled it with her name, and stored it in the attic. Not thrown out, not burned, just placed where memories go when they're too painful to keep in the light. I also started walking again, miles at a time, through the back roads and trails behind the neighborhood. It helped, the movement. It gave my grief a rhythm. One step forward, then another. I passed by the elementary school where she used to perform in plays, waved at the mailman who always slipped dog treats into the mailbox for my mutt. Life, as it does, kept moving forward. I had to move with it, even if some parts of me still felt stuck in that moment, reading that damn text. You don't have to come for my wedding. I met my dad, and he is better than you. But there it was, again and again, etched into my memory like a scar. But I'd stopped trying to scrub it away. Scars don't disappear. They just stop hurting so much after a while. And here's the truth I finally came to accept. You can love someone with everything you have and still need to protect yourself from them. Family doesn't give anyone the right to mistreat you. Titles don't absolve cruelty. And love, real love, is not an endless resource you're obligated to give when the well has run dry. I stood by her until she pushed me out. And when she did, I didn't fight for my spot at a table she clearly didn't want me sitting at. I walked away, not bitter, not broken, but aware. Aware that I gave her everything I could, and aware that, in the end, sometimes that still isn't enough. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you raised, mentored, or deeply loved, even when it broke your heart to do it? Tell me in the comments. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? And if you've ever had to draw a line between love and self-respect, how did you survive the silence? If this story moved you or reminded you of something you've lived through, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real stories about the moments that test and define us. See you soon in the next story.